Hello, everybody. Welcome. We are just about a minute after the top of the hour, so we're going to go ahead and get started. We're so happy that you're all here to join us today for this conversation. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can get started. All right, here we go. So, hello, everybody, again. Myself and our main speaker are so excited to be here to talk to you about managing your total family balance sheet, a holistic approach to wealth and risk management. My name is Reagan O'Hara, and I'm going to be the facilitator for today's conversation. I'm here just helping to assist with putting real world examples and questions to the content that Warren's going to be presenting on today. And with that, I do have a couple of housekeeping items that we can get to before I pass it on. So we want to make sure that we remain engaging to you. It's our top priority throughout the next hour or so. So as you have questions, please feel free to drop those in the Q&A or in the chat so we can get to them. I'm going to be keeping note as we walk through the information, as well as we'll have an eye on the chat and the Q&A panel, just to make sure we get all those answered during our interactive segment. Also, please join in on the conversation in the chat if you can. And at the end of today's slide deck, we will have Warren's contact information listed for you to reach out to him if you do have a specific resource that you'd like to request or just want to connect. This is our disclaimer for our Higginbotham Learning website. I'm not going to read it out loud for you. It's a doozy of one, but we can make sure we get it to you if needed. And if you do have any questions about it, you can email myself or Warren directly and we can get you an answer. And for today, our learning objectives include a content refresher of what was shared last year for the Cowtown Business Summit. However, we understand that not all of you were at that particular event. So we're going to review some of the previous sessions information and also explore the new concept of a new approach. And then from there, we're going to gain clarity on off-balance sheet risks with a live Q&A featuring real-world examples that Warren and I have put together across a bunch of different asset classes, such as investment portfolios, real estate, private equity, really anything else that you guys want to touch on. And then finally, you are going to walk away today with an understanding of how to manage your total family balance sheet, as well as an understanding of how it offers you a structured framework for professionally managing all liability exposures. And with that, I am very excited to introduce our main person of the hour, Warren Barhorst. Warren is a seasoned executive and entrepreneur with over 35 years of experience. He founded Essential in Houston and grew it into one of the largest independent firms in the state of Texas before partnering with Higginbotham in May of 2023. He's a huge Texas A&M fan, Whoop, and has a competitive spirit that fueled not only his successful college football career, but also to build quickly his insurance practice. He's written 3 books, which is very exciting to say now: The Game Plan of Definitive Playbook for Starting or Growing Your Business, Connection Culture, and the newest book, which we're going to touch on in just a minute, Opportunity at Risk. He's all about connection, relationships, and driving success. I'm sure there are a million more things that I could say about him, but Warren, I think we are ready for you to take it away.
All right. Thank you, Reagan. Appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I appreciate your time. As Reagan said, my 3rd book's coming out this fall. It's basically my life's work, which is what we're going to talk a little about today, about this total family balance sheet and our approach to generational wealth preservation. So if you're interested in the book, send us a note. We'll surely can get you a copy once things get off the press. We're working on through the edits and all the final details of getting the book printed. So, I talked about this when we were together back in February, I think. But the reality is, if you look at the Forbes 400 from 1982, and you look at those families, you think, okay, these are the wealthiest families in America, and obviously they would be able to keep themselves on the list just using the rule of 72 and how often it takes your money to double. If they made 7%, their money would double every 10 years. Obviously, they had that much money in 1982. They should still be on the list today. But the reality is that they have what we call financial gravity pulling down on their wealth. And if you look at that list of 400 names, there's only about 10 that are still on the list today that were on the original list in 1982 when Forbes invented the list. And so the lesson there is that the less money you have, it's exponentially harder to hold on to pass your money or to hold on to your wealth and pass it through generation to generation. And so in my belief, why a new approach is needed is that, you know, the traditional approach is fragmented and basically walled off in the silos of assets that a particular family might have. You know, their family operating business and their personal assets, they typically manage the risk and the wealth in those buckets versus managing it holistically across the top. And you know, most successful families have typically 6 asset classes. Some people have less, some people might have more, but in general terms, they have some kind of investment portfolio, a family operating business. They have real estate investments. They might be investing in private equity. They normally don't call it private equity, but they're loaning or giving money to other people to start businesses. And then they have their personal assets. And then the last class that we call family human capital, which is basically their intellectual property, the name of the family, and things of that nature that brings value to the world. There, in my opinion, as I've said, there's not a coordinated approach across all the silos. It's typically walled off. And then most people don't understand their off-balance sheet liabilities. And they know when they do a balance sheet, they know what the obligations are of the different entities or things that they do, but they don't consider the risks that are off balance sheet, which can actually cause the most financial gravity and cause the most damage to the wealth itself. And then most you know, traditional asset wealth and risk insurers, attorneys, tax professionals, business managers are not versed in risk management, and they need a risk manager to integrate the strategies across all those silos. And I'm not suggesting that one person be responsible for it across all the silos. What I'm suggesting is one person needs to be the integrator or work to get collaboration between those people. And you know, a quick example I can give you here is, you know, an ice cream manufacturer that lost everything due to a recall crisis, right? Most people don't know that whole story, but today that company is owned by another family, and the CEO of that entity was indicted on the 7 counts. So if you can think about it, they probably lost the company itself, the family operating business. They probably gave up a lot of their personal assets to try to save the company. And then when the CEO, the patriarch of the families, was indicted for those 7 counts, their family human capital was highly depleted because of that situation. And I'm not suggesting that I could have solved that problem, because hindsight is always 2020. But I am suggesting that with due diligence and proper discussions amongst those, maybe we could have walled that off and protected that family from having such a severe hit of gravity when it happened. You can think of a car manufacturer that faked its emissions testings and what that did to their reputational, you know, people don't think of that, but what does that do to their reputation in the marketplace? And do people trust them as a manufacturer that point going forward? Then the last point here is something that's pretty close to my heart. I had a client whose son later in life got divorced and moved back in with his parents. Parents were the guy was in pretty bad spirits. So the parents purchased him a pretty nice car, and they purchased the car in their name. The son was using the car to street race some. He was posting that on his Facebook page and things of that nature. Long story short, he had a very bad accident, killed a few people, and then the parents killed himself also, and the parents ended up being sued for over $5 million for the damage that the son had caused. And again, you know, hindsight is always 2020. But had the car been titled in the son's name, not the parents' name, then the parents wouldn't have been involved in that accident. And that's one of those kind of off balance sheet liabilities that people don't realize they have when they do something that they think is going to be good for someone, but actually could be detrimental to themselves. And so I believe that it all starts with your understanding of what risk is, right? And so the likelihood of being exposed to something of danger or losing something of value, it can result from a given action, activity, or no action, right? It can be foreseen or unforeseen. And the reality is it's part of every human endeavor. When you drove to work today or wherever you drove to, if you've been in your car, I mean, you know, you passed an 18-wheeler that's full of all kinds of expensive parts. And if you cause the accident, or what we call in the industry, you know, you're the proximate cause of the chain reaction of events, you're liable for the damage to that. But you could also just be sitting in your house and someone could lose the control of their car and they could run into your living room and damage your house and maybe injure you. So you can't really get away from risk. And the moral of this story is that you have to understand it and then bucket those things in certain categories and make sure that you're protected from those exposures that concern you most. Which leads us to this, when you talk about concerning most, it leads you to what most people refer to as what I call an inverted risk focus. And when I was playing football in college, in high school, during 2 days in the summer and the second practice in the afternoon, it gets really hot in South Texas and the clouds roll in and thunder and lightning kind of goes off in the distance and the coach hollers, run, go to the house, which is code for run to the locker room, change your clothes, don't take a shower, don't get iced, don't go to the training room and leave, because if the storm passes quickly, the coaches will put you back on the field. But the reality is probably the statistic probability of being struck by lightning is very, very low, but we're all afraid of being struck by lightning. You all locked the doors to your car today when you went into wherever you're going, and there's a very, very low probability of your car being stolen. There's a 2 in 100 chance of your house burning in a 30-year mortgage. There's a 12 out of 100 chance of being disabled if you're under the age of about 45. There's a 26 out of 100 chance of your house flooding. And even though you don't live in a flood prone area, there's a 50 out of 100 chance of being in an assisted living facility. There's 80 out of 100% chance of a cyber attack, and there's 100 out of 100% chance of death. If you go to the next slide, Reagan, it really should look like this. The foundation of your plan should be based on the highest probability things that are happening to you. But most of us focus on the stuff that's least likely to happen because we're afraid of that. And maybe we don't want to talk about dying. Maybe we don't want to talk about going to an assisted living facility. Maybe we want to ignore the fact that we're going to get a cyber attack. But those based on probability, that's the most likely thing to happen to you, but we tend to worry about the stuff that's not going to happen to us. And then the next thing you have to do is understand your emotional and physical risk tolerance. And as a young person, you have really good emotional risk tolerance because you believe you don't have anything, you don't have any physical assets, you don't have any financial wherewithal, so you take a lot of risk. And if it goes south on you, if you lose money or it didn't work out, you're not dissatisfied because your emotional risk tolerance kind of outweighs your physical to drive satisfaction. But as you grow more success throughout life, people tend to become more emotionally adverse to risk, even though they can take on more risk because they have more physical assets or physical wealth to take on that risk. But we have kind of an opposite exposure there. And the joke that I always use is in the insurance business, we see insurance carriers cancel customers for filing windshield claims. Maybe they go to the car wash, and every time they go to the car wash, there's a guy there with a little tent, and he says, "Hey, I can fix your rock chip for free." Well, he keeps turning those claims in. The reason it's free is because he's turning it into the insurance company. And then the insurance company cancels the insurance because they filed 7 or 8 rock chip claims, and there's an anomaly in actuarial science that a frequency, the number of claims, drives severity. So the insurance carrier is afraid that there's a big claim coming because they filed a lot of smaller claims. When you unpack that with the customer and they're very upset because their insurance is being canceled, they're completely dissatisfied. And then they're saying, wait a minute, I could have paid for all these out of my pocket. It's only $35 a claim, or it's only $50 a claim. And it wasn't a big physical issue to pay for it, but I thought insurance would cover it. So emotionally, I took that risk. And then ultimately you're not satisfied with the outcome. You can apply this to all kind of risk situations, and you have to kind of balance your emotional and your physical risk tolerance if you're going to be satisfied when you actually experience a hit from gravity or a loss that attacks your family's wealth. And so the next thing that comes into this is what we call risk perception. And this is what you know versus what you should know or think you know and what you don't know. And the best example I can give you is a roof leak, right? And there's two pictures here. There's pictures of the back of a chimney on a roof with some debris stacked up on it, leaves and different things. And if it rained today and the water leaked through that flashing and you have a half-inch of water on the floor of your house when you got home from work, most people would think that they have an insurance claim. Well, I would tell you that maybe 4 out of 10 people in Texas actually have a claim because they call their insurance company and they go, okay, this happened. And the person says, okay, the adjuster comes out and they say, well, actually what happened is rain through a faulty roof and you bought a named peril insurance policy versus an all risk insurance policy. And so you find out that there's no coverage because rain through a faulty roof is not a covered peril on a named peril policy. And then the adjuster even adds insult to injury and says, well, actually, there would be no coverage. We would pay for the if you had an all risk policy, we pay for the damage to your house itself, the sheetrock that's wet and the carpet and the couch that's wicked up the water, but we're not going to pay to repair your roof because it's a construction defect. And if you can see in the two pictures, the second picture is showing the same chimney with a cricket installed, which better diverts the water from going into that chimney so it wouldn't happen. So the insurance carrier would deny repairing the roof because that's a construction default. And then people typically get even more frustrated with the situation, not understanding what's going on. And it all goes back to most people think they're informed, then they find out they're ill-informed, and then usually they become completely uninformed by the end of the situation. And so when you have risks, there's only 4 things you can do with it. You can avoid it, you can mitigate it, you can transfer it, or you can assume it. And right, so to avoid it, it takes an extreme change in behavior to basically do this. And this is all too familiar with us because we see it in the tabloids or on the news where a famous person tends to keep driving while they're under the influence of something, right? And they could stop drinking, they could stop driving, they could hire a driver. There's lots of ways to change or avoid it, but they have to make that decision to change their behavior. And in most cases, it's hard to do. And in most cases, it starts at the top of the house, or in a company, it's the top person. In a family, it's the top person who decides to make that change in behavior and then pushes that change down through the organization to make it more conscious of how we're going to avoid this exposure. And then mitigation is just it takes action, right? If you're going to avoid damage to your house, maybe when you built it, you put a water shutoff device that turns the water off so that you won't suffer a water leak and it floods your house. Maybe if you own a beach house, you would invest in hurricane shutters or hurricane glass. If you had an investment portfolio, maybe you diversify it across different asset classes and things of that nature to mitigate your risk of loss in one specific segment of the portfolio, et cetera. And then if you're going to transfer it to an insurance company or some kind of third-party financing device, what people don't realize is you're actually selling your risk. You're selling it to other people, and people say, Warren, no, I'm not. I'm buying insurance. And I'm like, yes, you're transferring the risk to them, but you're selling your risk. And so you have to make your risk look the best so that you can get a competitive offer from an insurance company to take that risk on for you. And then the last thing is assumption. And if you're going to assume the risk, theoretically, the more assets you have, you can, and the smaller claims don't have any financial impact, you can assume more and more as time goes on. But back to that emotional and physical risk tolerance aspect, most people, as they get more successful, they end up becoming more conservative because they're trying to hang on to what they've built versus when they started, they were very aggressive and not conservative. And so there's a lot of discussions around that. Which risks should you assume? Which risks are you assuming inadvertently and have no idea that you're actually assuming those risks? And in a real world situation, most people can only transfer about 25% of their exposures to an insurance company. The rest of the exposures are just risks inherently with living or running a business or whatever. And so you assume a lot of those unknowingly, thinking that they're transferred to the insurance company, and they're actually not. Next slide. So when you're transferring risk, and this is an important piece, most people do it based on the cover page, which I'll show you here in just a second. But the selection process is really should be more complex than that. You have to look at the insurance carriers or the transferring parties' capacity for that risk. Does their contract or their coverage, is it broad enough, and does it do what you want it to do? Or do you end up with the roof claim, water through a faulty roof, that's not covered? What kind of claims handling do they do? Do they pay easily, or are they very difficult to get money from? Are they easy to do business with, right? If you own a business and you're trying to get certificates of insurance to get paid from your vendors or from your customers, but it takes 60 days to have an endorsement issued on your policy, that may not be the best carrier for your situation. What kind of relationship do you, if you're buying it direct, or does your broker have with that carrier? How are they formed financially? Are they stock or privately held, or are they mutual, which means they're owned by their policyholder base? Are they admitted, which means they're regulated by the government and they file their rates and their forms with the state government? Or are they non-admitted, which means they have a license to be in the state, but there's no regulation on their pricing or their rate forms, their policy contract language? There's nothing wrong with either one of them, but as you should just know that when you're going into it, so you understand what you're buying. And then what's their financial rating? One of the largest financial institutions that was an insurance company failed during the Great Recession. They took $185 billion from the federal government. And so we tend to think that, because they're a big name or whatever, that they have the financial capacity to take on our situation, and they may not. Particularly in states that are wind prone, there are a lot of startup insurance companies that they don't have a very strong financial rating. And if you look at their balance sheet, many customers, if their company or the family's personal assets are actually more than the financial institution that their betting is going to pay their claim later on if there's a problem. And then the last thing you should look at is the price. In all things considered the same, you would take the lowest price, but there's always a give and take. And if you go to the next slide, I'll kind of make this point to the idea of not being fooled by the noise, because the industry spends about $100 billion in the last 10 years advertising that insurance is a commodity. And if you go on to the next slide, Reagan, you can see from this example, it's not all the same. If you look at this page and then compare it to the next page, there's one change on this page. It's at the top. One says Form A and one says Form B. Everything else is identical on the cover page, but that one letter changes the contract language behind the insurance cover page or the declarations page. That's what you're actually buying is the insurance contract. You're not buying the cover page, but most people shop it based on the cover page. And what I will tell you is that there's only two ways you can make insurance cheaper, because all risk is priced the same. If you think about it, it's actuarial science, it's mathematics to price that risk. So you can change or lower the price, make it more competitive by changing the contract language, lessening the terms and conditions, putting more risk on the customer and less risk on the insurance company, or you can be buying market share. Sometimes you can have an apples to apples insurance coverage, and one's cheaper than the other one. Realize the savings and take it on, but don't be surprised in a year or two if that price is back what you were paying before. And consumers usually get frustrated with that. And I'm like, wait a minute, but you did realize the savings, right? You saved money the last 2 years, and in the third year, their price was back up to where you used to be. You won that conversation. But the biggest issue here is to make sure that you're not shopping it based on the cover page, that you're understanding what the contract says, and that contract will do what you want it to do. And so the next part of the framework is to classify risks. And so if you're going to take on more risk, you have to understand what those risks are. So if you're going to assume more risk and you want to be satisfied from an emotional and physical risk tolerance, you have to kind of put this in here, right? So risks are typically bucketed in one of these four places: high frequency, low severity, which means they happen a lot, windshield claims, rock chips, but they don't cost very much to fix, right? Then there's high frequency, high severity, car accidents, if you're a trucking company or something of that nature, depending on the scale of those, they could be high frequency, low severity. If you've got a lot of asset base, low severity, $1 million could be low severity if you're a $10 billion company. And so this is all relative to the size of your asset base. So you've got high frequency, high severity. Then you've got low frequency, low severity. Doesn't happen very often, and it doesn't cost you very much when it does. That's probably a great one to self-insure or take more risk on. And then low frequency, high severity, that's probably one that you would want to insure or transfer, because it doesn't happen very often, but when it does happen, it's devastating to your financial wherewithal. So when you kind of put this thing all in a framework, this is what it looks like. And this is the total family balance sheet by Higginbotham. You can see the asset classes across the top. What's your risk tolerance from an emotional and physical standpoint? What's your risk perception from informed, ill-informed, uninformed? Do you know your risks and your unknown risks? How do you avoid, mitigate, or transfer, or assume them? And then what do those exposures give you to from a frequency and severity perspective? So if you kind of think of it from a holistic approach, you've got to coordinate the advice across and asset management across all the asset silos. Too many times, the wealth advisor doesn't know that you've bought another piece of real estate, or doesn't know that you've done something else in your asset buckets. And so they keep you exposed to the same assets that you set up with them in the beginning without them realizing that. So, to diversify your portfolio, maybe now you're way overexposed because you've bought a lot more real estate, and they need to take the REITs out of your investment portfolio. And I'm giving you a very simple example with that, right? I believe there has to be professional collaboration across your wealth and business advisors, your attorneys, your CPAs, brokers, agents, and insurance. So they're all working together and they all understand what's going on in these different asset silos. It's okay to have a different risk manager or a different attorney personally and for your other businesses, but do they understand what's going on with each other so they can do that, right? Then you've got to be pretty proactive in identifying your risks and what they are. And you've got to monitor what's really going on for your off-balance sheet liabilities. And then to be holistic, you've got a multi-layer strategies in leveraging all the techniques of mitigation, avoidance, transference, and assumption. And that's pretty much how you avoid gravity. And so what we thought we would do here is kind of share with you all some ideas on what these off-balance sheet risks look like, and to get you thinking through it. I'm happy to share this fact finder or sheet. This is it, and it's pretty complex, and I'll run you through it real quick. If you look at it may be hard to see on the small screen, but on the left side in the green bucket, you see that's your investment portfolio, stocks, bonds, hedge funds, things like that. And then it's giving you some risks that are typically associated with that investment portfolio. And are you informed about it? Are you uninformed? Do you avoid it? Do you mitigate it? Do you transfer? Do you assume it? It's just a little checklist, a thought process to go through it. And you've got one for your real estate portfolio. You've got one for your family operating business. You've got one for your private equity investments, one for your personal assets, and then one for your family human capital. And you'll see at the bottom that there's empty spaces or open spots. That's because, and it's in a spreadsheet format, you can add the exposures that you may have individually. These are the most common exposures that people have that aren't normally on their balance sheet. And it just gets the thought process going of how to do it. So you feel free to take this piece if you want it. We'll send it to you. You can take it to your advisor and have a discussion around this, or you can engage with somebody from Higginbotham to go through this process with you in one of your asset classes that you're concerned about.
Okay, awesome. Well, we're going to jump into just some more scenario-based questions here, Warren. And I think for everybody, I want to start off with, transferring and classifying risk. We've talked a lot about that leading up to this spreadsheet. And when it comes to transferring risk, like through contracts or insurance, we talked about Form A versus Form B that changes the whole game just based on that one change. What are some of the biggest traps people fall into, and how does it relate to these different silos?
There's probably two places that the biggest traps. People sign a lot of contracts and they might get business advice on the contract. Most business attorneys are not strong at indemnity. Insurance defense, insurance indemnity is a niche part of the law. And so they've got some exposure to it in passing the bar and all those kind of things, but it's not their go-to. So we see a lot of times people will sign a contract that's not fair. So maybe you rent a house for a weekend place or whatever, and the indemnity clause in that contract says that you're responsible for all damage to the house. Well, the reality is you should only be responsible for the damage you caused to the house. So if, you might find yourself staying somewhere, it burns down while you're there, and now you're being sued because you were in the house when it happened, even though it was the hot water heater that caused the fire, and now it's your fault because you indemnified the owner in the contract unknowingly. And we see a lot of that happen with that piece. And then the second trap is shopping your insurance based on the cover page. And people think that the cover page means it's there. And they'll tell me all the time, well, Warren, the agent told me it was the same. And I chuckle at that and I'll say, well, our business is not that complex from a barrier to entry. And so many times you're doing business with a very small insurance broker that the person you're talking to hasn't invested in their craft. It isn't a professional risk manager. And to give the group a feeling, Higginbotham's the 18th, or I'll say the top 20 largest brokers in the United States. We spend a lot of time and energy learning about the business. We make sure our people are professional. But if you go, Higginbotham will do $1 billion a year in revenue. And that's not our sales, because the sales are what we sell for the insurance carrier. We don't measure that. We just measure what we collected in commissions or fees from our customers. And so, we could do $100 billion in sales and have $1 billion of revenue. So these are big organizations that are dealing with complex situations. But if you get to number 100 is about a $60 million revenue insurance agency. Still a very nice business. Okay, but it falls off from number 100 to small insurance agencies that are $250,000 or $500,000 in revenue. They just don't have the financial wherewithal to invest in the people to do it. And when you're first starting out, that might be a perfect agency for you, or perfect broker. And that one man shop or whatever it is, they may be professional. I'm not saying anything against that. I'm just saying that most likely they're not. Right. And so you know that as a consumer, how good of advice this person's giving you, what they're doing, and that they may grow with you the whole entire time that you were there. I was once a small insurance agency and I grew that business, and now I'm part of a very big agency. So I was professional back then as I am today. So I'm not saying it's impossible. What I'm telling you though is that the likelihood is, because it falls off from $60 million of revenue to a couple $100,000 or maybe $500,000 of revenue very, very quickly. And there's tens of thousands of brokers that are that size, and they will tell you it's all the same because they haven't read the contracts. They haven't been educated on.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
is there anything, in that fine print of those contracts and things that people are going through that you need to look for specifically, or
Yeah,
just
it's
kind of
an
that?
interesting concept, and insurance companies are smart, right? They're involved in it every day, where you as a consumer, you're not involved in it every day. So normally they'll give you the coverage in one portion, right? So you're reading the contract and you'll look at it and they'll say, okay, this is covered. And then you'll go to the back where the endorsements are at, and they'll take the coverage away, or they'll take a piece of the coverage away. So that's why it's a specialized part of the law. You've got to read the first part of the contract, then you got to go read the second part of the contract. And then there might be a third part of the contract that you've got to tie all those language together. They'll give you coverage, take it away, and give it back. It's all kinds of unique things they'll do with the contract.
You have a great example. I might be jumping the gun a little bit, of something like that I didn't know, where if you fly internationally, somewhere
Yeah.
along the way you lose your medical coverage, something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, exactly. And most people know this. In most cases, your health insurance ends when the wheels lift off on an international
Yeah.
flight. Most people think I have health insurance, so it's going to cover me in a foreign country. And there are some policies that do, but that's like a great question to ask your health insurance broker. Hey, if I'm on an international flight, how does my health insurance respond? Well,
Mm.
if I tear my ACL in London because I slipped, walking in the rain off a curb. Will you guys fly me home, or am I going to fly home, coach? With
Yeah.
an ice bag on my knee. And so those are all great. They're great kind of questions. It's funny, Reagan, because I'm the Debbie Downer at most parties, right? I end up, I could go to the party and people find out I'm a risk manager and what I do. And invariably, someone will bring a friend over and say, "Hey, Warren, so this is so and so. They've got a problem with their insurance." And 9 times out of 10, I tell them, "Look, you got exactly what you paid for. It's a contract, and the carrier does it. Nothing more, nothing less. It'll do exactly what the policy or the contract says. That doesn't mean you can't get a jury of your friends to feel sorry for you because the big evil insurance company won't pay your claim. But in most cases, why fight for it? Why have to go fight to get your claim paid? Why don't you just pay or buy the right contract that you want in the beginning? Because the price difference is not that much to get a better policy than a cheaper policy." And people say, "Well, Warren, I saved $1,000. Okay, you live in $1 million house, and $1,000 is a meaningful savings to you. You run a $10 million business, and $10,000 is a meaningful dollar. So again, we have to adjust our emotional and physical risk tolerance with the amount of physical ability we can take risk.
Yeah.
But we're opposite of that, right? We don't buy when we don't have anything, we don't buy any insurance, but we should be buying the most insurance when we don't have anything. And then when we have things, we tend to buy the most insurance when we should be taking more risk.
Yeah. Yeah. So if anybody's taking that fall trip to Italy, remember that as you get onto your plane. Okay, just one more before we get into some more scenarios. So this framework of holistic total balance sheet, how is that going to help people see risks that they might otherwise miss?
The best way to do it is to walk through this checklist, and it just kind of gets you talking. And then the second approach I like to use is to ask the people what's keeping you up at night. Most people have an inherent nature where the hair is going up on the back of their neck. They're worried about something, and they just don't take the action to solve that problem. And then normally the occurrence happens, and again, hindsight's 2020. We look back and go, "Man, I could have solved that problem. I could have fixed that had I taken action." That mitigation thing means you got to take action, and then you've got to really be thoughtful and kind of go through and talk through what your exposures really are. And that's what this tool is designed to do. It's designed to get that conversation started.
Yeah, I like it. All right, I think I'm going to zoom in here, maybe on family operating business. If you could share a story, you have one about some very wealthy families that you've worked with in the past, and I know that you have one private equity story about a group in Houston. Can you tell that story and then also talk about what risk was revealed in some of their blind spots through
Yeah,
this
and I don't like to
experience?
use people's names, so and don't try to connect the dots. There's no reason to point fingers at anybody. But a few years ago, we were the sponsor or insurance partner, risk management partner for a network of investors in the Houston marketplace, and they really wanted us to evaluate their potential investments of what the risk was and the insurance exposure. And then they wanted us to go back and look at all the insurance of all their current investments. And this particular group were early investors. By definition, we probably call them angels, where they were typically the first round of funding into most of these deals. And our discovery in that process was not one of their current underlying investments had insurance. And when you went to talk to the operator of that entity, you would ask about, okay, do you have fire insurance? Do you have liability insurance? No, 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 no. And they would say, "Well, I'm a startup. We can't afford those things." And they would affect our EBITDA or our rate of return. And so it's kind of an oxymoron, right? So you're taking all this risk, you're investing the money, you're already taking risk to invest the money that you're going to lose. And then maybe the business idea actually was going to work. It was going to make money, but the building burns down in the middle of the run, and there's no insurance on it, and you lose all the intellectual property. Everything burns in the fire, and now you've lost your investment, and you've lost all the assets that you had built in that little entity or whatever it might be. It's just, or maybe you get sued by somebody for patent infringement or things of that nature, and there's no insurance in place because the the guy running the business for the Angels didn't buy any insurance.
Hmm. And in your opinion, why do you think people focus so much on making money and putting all their energy into making money, but not so much preserving it? That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah.
It's much more fun to make money than it is to try to protect money.
Yeah.
It's so draining. And I've been in many family conversations and looking at a portfolio of businesses and investments and things like that show up on this asset classes that we try to represent here. And you start digging into those details and you can see them going, oh God, I don't want to do this.
Mm.
It's just overwhelming to protect themselves from them. But I try to bring them back that it's good work to do if you're truly trying to move that wealth. And you have to remember our wealthiest families, the 400 wealthiest families from 1982, only 10 of them are still on the list. If they couldn't do it, what makes you think you can? And so that gives them the impetus usually to take the actions they need to do to protect themselves, to make sure that their wealth is passed to the next generation. And
Yeah.
it's a funny analogy, but it's in every culture. And so I write about this in the book. It's shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations, clog to clog, rice paddy to rice paddy. He who has it, he who makes it gives it. He who gives it gets it, spends it. And then, I mean, it's just every culture you can find it in their language that they've written about this paradigm of somebody makes the wealth, somebody spends the wealth, and the next part of the family's back working the field or doing whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very interesting. I want to talk about maybe some cyber risk examples. That's a really hot topic right now in everything that I'm seeing. When it comes to cyber risk, that often feels like something for big corporations, but you have said that personal cyber exposure is just as real. Can you talk a little bit about that and the different silos that all falls under?
Yeah, it's an interesting concept. I was out in Telluride this weekend with some people, and we were in the airport, and I said, well, I don't have internet service, and they said, well, just join the public Wi-Fi, and I said, I can't. I'm not allowed to, right? So because if you're my customer, I have your social security number, I have all your personal identifiable information is accessible through my devices. You don't want me on a public internet. Right? Because somebody could be faking that they're the public internet, and then they could get my login credentials, get into our system, and steal all that data. And I don't want to be the guy who's blamed for that, right? So I'm very cautious about where I do it. And so I'll talk to people, families about this, right? So we'll start talking about that, and I'll say, well, let's look at your operating business, and we have a way of sniffing the environment to see what it looks like, right? We can run some tools to see what the hackers can see, and it'll build a report for us. I mean, say, man, things look really, really good at your office. And then we'll say, well, do you work from home? Well, of course I work from home, Warren. I'm working all the time. I own this stuff, right? Well, what does that look like? And then you'll find out that they have the Comcast router with the 1234 password. Every neighborhood kid in the neighborhood's getting on it. And I'm asking, how come your IT guy that runs the office is not running IT at the house? Never thought about that one. And that's the kind of stuff you really have to, and then you got to have conversations with your family about what the exposure is for them to be doing things on the internet. And we have this wealth and we're trying to protect it. And I don't want to be the Debbie Downer, but maybe you don't do certain things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny. I grew up in a house of computer engineers, and they were not messing around with their Wi-Fi. And as a teenager, that made me so mad that I couldn't just bring friends over for them to hop on the Wi-Fi. But it was a strict no-go. I'm sure it's even more so in nowadays age. I mean, you never know.
My wife yells at me all the time because we've got rules set up in you can't copy, you can't screenshot or copy and paste things into an email, because it's preventing somebody else from doing it. It's not worried about my wife Lisa doing it, but she's like, this is so stupid. Why are we doing this? Well, it's done to protect, it's ultimately protecting her, but it drives her crazy with those structures are in there. I hear 2-factor authentication, right? having
Yeah.
somebody verify. People say that's inconvenient, Warren, I'm not going to do it. Well, then people are going to steal your password and they're going to get in your account.
Mhm.
That's like the first layer of defense that's very, very simple to implement.
Yes. Yeah, and it affects everything, I think, in these silos here. So,
Well, it does, and what people don't realize is when you see a big box store have their data breach, and then what it does to their reputation. I haven't been to that big box store and purchased something because I'm afraid that they're gonna do it. I just go to. There's more than one big box store. I can just go to the other one that I think might have better data security.
yeah. Yeah, yeah. All right, I have a question here in the chat, Warren. Can you speak on how one decides the amount of personal liability insurance they should obtain?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question, and a great one. So theoretically, in theory, you need enough liability insurance to protect your assets, plus some for hassle factor. And people are going to go, "Wow, Warren. So what? I mean, that means if I'm $100 million, I got to buy $100 million of of coverage." And I would say, no, you got to protect your exposed assets, right? So I'm going to use your personal liability in this example. So I would, if you're very wealthy like that, and had $100 million, I'm probably going to ask you, why are the cars titled in your name? Liability follows the titled owner. Why aren't the cars owned in an entity that just the entity has the vehicles in it? And maybe we only need $1 million of coverage. We need enough to pay somebody if we injured them, but we don't have to protect our personal assets because that vehicle is owned by the company. And in Texas, most states, liability follows the titled owner of the vehicle, not the driver. That's most people don't get that. They think, oh, so if you borrow your friend's car, their insurance is paying. If you loan your car to somebody, your insurance is paying. If your housekeeper, your nanny is driving your car, your net worth is exposed to their mistake, not theirs. And so there's structuring techniques to wall that off so that you can buy less liability insurance. So ultimately, you want enough insurance or protection, structuring that the person who's suing you is going to go away with the insurance money, and they're not going to look to go deeper into that. And if they do look to go deeper, they're not going to get anything because there's nothing in the entity that they're suing. That's why people set up trusts. That's why people set up LLCs and organizations to try to wall off that liability in different buckets of assets. Hopefully that answered your question. And so to the person, I'd have to kind of look at your structure and tell you, hey, you need 2 million, 5 million, 7 million, 10 million, 15 million, 20 million. You can buy hundreds of millions of dollars of liability insurance if you need it.
Great. Thank you so much. All right, looks like we have about 10 minutes left here. So I have a couple takeaway questions we can get to before we wrap.
Okay.
All right, let's talk about someone who's just starting out. It's actually a great segue to what you were just talking about. Maybe they're launching a new business, just beginning to build some wealth of their own. Where should they begin when reviewing risk?
So the basics are pretty much there, right? So if you're starting a business, you need liability insurance. And if you have employees, you're going to need workers' compensation insurance. And then depending on what your business does, you might need property insurance. If you're acquiring inventory or have assets, furniture and fixtures, you might need that. But again, you might say, you know what, I bought all this stuff at garage sales, Warren. It didn't cost me that much money. I don't really care about insuring the contents, right? But if somebody slips and falls in my store or slips and falls in my warehouse, I want the insurance to protect me from that. So that's what that general liability insurance does. And then workers' compensation, in Texas, you can subscribe or not subscribe to workers' compensation. People need to understand that by not subscribing, you're basically saying that I will be responsible for my employees' work-related injuries for as long as they live. By subscribing or buying a workers' compensation policy, you're opting into the system, and then the laws protect you as an employer because you've subscribed, and now the workers' comp policy pays for those injuries, and you can't be held responsible for those injuries. So those are kind of the basics of when you get starting a business. If you have trucks, you're going to need to buy, or vehicles, you're going to need to buy car insurance, and then depending on the scale of the business and what they're doing, you might need product recall coverage. It just varies. You might need advertising injury because you're a marketing firm and you could steal inadvertently take someone else's idea and then they sue you because you've been using a marketing campaign that is actually trademarked or owned by somebody else. But it just, so you kind of review it and start from there.
Right. One thing too, I think that a lot of people can connect with, just in general, at least here in Texas, we have a lot of neighborhoods going up, lots of home building happening. And I want you to share an example, I think that we've talked about before, of building a home. Who actually needs to carry coverage? What does that look like? If you could just say a few things, I think it's really interesting.
Yeah, first of all, people will buy let's say you bought a lot and you've engaged a custom home builder to build the house for you. And normally they won't tell us ahead of time. It'd be great if we were as a risk manager, we were in those discussions so we could help them wall off the liability. But it's critical that you have liability insurance on the lot itself. So the way most homeowners insurance contracts are written is they say that they'll extend liability from your homeowner's policy to that land, as long as there's no improvements. That's the contract language in layman's terms. And so, but as soon as you do any improvements, I'm talking about scratch the dirt, now there's no liability insurance. So you have to tell the insurance policy via an endorsement to extend liability coverage over to that thing. Gets complicated because a lot of people will buy that property in an LLC, and then they'll extend liability from their homeowner's policy, which is in their name, and the LLC is a different entity, and so therefore there's no coverage. They paid for it and they put it in there, but the insurance company didn't check that, right? Which brings up a great point that people need to understand. When you buy a life insurance policy, you prove insurable interest when you apply. That's why there's so many questions. Who's the beneficiary? Who's the owner? Who's the insured? And if you've ever bought a life insurance policy, people know what I'm talking about. When you buy a property casualty insurance policy, you have to prove insurable interest at the point of loss. So that's why it's easy to buy. Literally, you can add a car to your insurance policy. No one checks the title or asks you any questions. And then 2 years later, you wreck the car and they say, I'm sorry, there's no coverage because that car was titled in somebody else's name. And that's not insured. When you read the definition of insured on the policy, and then the client goes, wait a minute, I paid for this. Yes, but it's a contract, and the contract will only do what the contract says it'll do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest takeaway from today. I think we should have written that on our backgrounds. Yeah.
So going back to that question on the contract of building a house, and so the next question will be, well, who's responsible for the house while it's under construction? And every time the customer will say, well, the builder is, because they're building it for me. And I'll say, well, actually, let's go look at the contract, and then you'll read the contract and you'll find out that you are. And so that, as the customer, you should, and the owner, you need to buy what's called builder's risk coverage or course of construction coverage to ensure that, or maybe the builder did because it's part of his contract to supply the builder's risk. Just need to know which one it is and how you're going to do it. If the builder's supplying it, you're going to want to be named an additional insured. I'm going to give you horror stories. Let's say that house burns down and that guy and the contractor had the insurance, and maybe the contractor's not doing as well as he thought. He gets that insurance settlement. Instead of spending it on your money, on your house, he uses it for other projects he has going on because you're not named on that policy. If you're named on that policy and you've got a lost payee on it, that check's going to come payable to you and them. Right? And so they can't cash that check without you saying, okay, let's cash it. I'm going to pay you for the draw that I owe you for your house. It's fundamental things that you as a consumer don't understand until you get burned by it. And an insurance professional can help you, risk manager can help you put those things in place to prevent that from happening to you.
Yeah.
Lots of houses get built without any builder's risk because the builder thought the homeowner did it and the homeowner thought the builder had it.
It's one of these. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Anybody else who has any questions, please submit those. I'm going to throw you my last question, Warren, which is, you've painted a great big picture of risks across personal lines, business, family assets, all these other silos that are here on our screen. Why is a holistic risk management approach better than treating each thing individually?
Because the exposures cross over and people don't realize that. And so I'm going to use, the family operating business in most cases is what's generating or creating the wealth to do all the other things, right? And so if you'll look at it, and people just don't realize it, that family operating business is creating personal assets. And I'll use handbags, clothing, jewelry. And because it's acquired hundreds of dollars or $1,000 at a time, people don't realize how much they actually have. And so, I mean, I can go into any successful family person's closet, and I don't care whether it's a male or a female, they have a lot of expensive things in that closet.
Yes.
And if I took them all away from you in a fire and had to replace them, how much would that cost? Same thing with a business, right? You acquire the tools to run the business over time. Typically, you look at your balance sheet and you've depreciated those tools because it's a commercial enterprise, and you think, oh, we only have, $2 million of assets, when the replacement cost of those assets might be $10 million because the depreciated value is down to $2 million. So there's just disconnects in every one of those silos that someone needs to be asking those questions. And again, I'm not suggesting I need to be the guy buying insurance in the family operating business. I'm the guy suggesting, hey, have we thought about this? Have we thought about that? We're in the first one there in, personal assets and family operating business. It's the second one, aircraft. People charter airplanes, right? Successful families charter airplanes. And my question is, who's covering the non-owned aircraft liability? And they'll say, well, Warren, what are you talking about? I charter them, that the charter company is responsible for the airplane. And I'm like, really? What happens if you are the person responsible for depressurizing the plane and making it land hard and it ruins the landing gear or whatever? You're the one negligent. So maybe you need to make sure that when you charter a plane, you're named on that policy that the charter person has for non-owned aircraft liability. So if you're the person who causes the proximate cause, a chain reaction of events, you've got coverage. That's why that question's there. I'm sure people are looking and saying, I don't own aircraft, so I don't have any exposure there. But do you charter aircraft? Do you fly on your friend's aircraft? You could cause it. You could be a third party on a plane and cause the damage. It's crazy.
So many things could happen. Yes.
And it's fun. But the more success you have, and you know this, I like to talk to college students when they first get started and try to mentor them and coach them. And with success comes more responsibility. When you're young, Reagan, you think, okay, well, I'm going to be successful. My life's going to be so easy because I'm going to get money and I'm going to have all this stuff and I'm going to have free time. And the reality is with success comes complexity and responsibility and all the things that this off balance sheet risk analysis creates for people.
Yeah, I like it. Well, that takes us right up to a minute before the top of the hour. So we're going to go ahead and summarize and wrap it all up. Just to give you just a summary to take home with you, we talked about how you're only as good as the contract. Remember, risk tolerance is both physical and emotional. A little extra money goes a long way when it comes to risk. With success comes more responsibility. Get the extra medical insurance if you're off to Italy this fall. And this is what risk management is all about, helping you make the right choices. So if you have questions about that, you can shoot over a message to Warren. I'm going to put his email in the chat right now. We appreciate your time, everybody who joined. And Warren, as always, thank you so much. This was great.
Great to be here. Happy to share. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Thank you all. Appreciate it.
All right. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.